Alright, let's draw some more hands. Because I'm still enjoying it. So I always kind of like to start with the back of the hand and uh, still doing the hand bones, by the way. Back of the hand I like to draw first because I feel like that's probably the easiest place to start with a drawing. And then I can kind of figure out the perspective a little more easily. And then I can sort of, from there, start focusing on the back of the fingers. So I'm really just kind of, I like to think more in two-dimensionally. I like to begin by thinking two-dimensionally before I start thinking too heavily about a three-dimensional space. It's always easier to start thinking of the hand as a two-dimensional shape rather than a three-dimensional shape because, well, probably for a few reasons, but the best reason is it's easier to make quick adjustments if you need to. There's nothing worse than, doing like a perspective drawing of a hand and then having it all sort of go wrong anyway. It's very frustrating when that happens, and that's happened to me a lot. So I like to think two-dimensionally first before I start going into perspective and things like that. I'm actually going to zoom the video in a little bit as far as I can, so it's a bit easier to see. That's about as far as this webcam zooms in. So I know the drawing's a little bit too small, but I gotta just keep these sketches rather on the small side. I don't really want to make them too large. That's another reason I keep it small, because I can draw a bit faster and forms are a little bit easier to see when you keep it on the smaller side, I think. So anyway, we will carry on. So that's kind of the structure that I'm thinking of. You can see that I've kind of just sketched it in very quickly. That's like the silhouette of the back of the hand, or the silhouette of the hand shape, I should say. And yeah, I think it's something I can work with. And again, when I'm sketching two-dimensionally, I can make adjustments on the fly. So I'm really trying to, I'm thinking, okay, what's the most how can I draw this in the most simple way possible? And, you know, what sort of things can I do to make it work? So now I'm thinking a little bit more about the perspective. I'm trying to make a lot of these shapes look more three-dimensional now. So I'm going to put the carpus probably about here. Back of the hand can start around here maybe, and this is like the line of the knuckles where it like curves around. But again, I'm only thinking of drawing the bones of the hand, so I'm not, you know, like while I am drawing the basic hand shape, I don't have to draw any of the muscles or anything like that. I don't think that'll be necessary. I'm just wondering, I feel like that index finger is a little bit too long, which is not a problem because I can just shorten it. So that's the benefit of just, you know, sketching very two-dimensionally. You can just make adjustments like that very, very quickly. I think, like I said in the last video, there's nothing worse than when you spend hours and hours and hours just sketching something and you end up getting it wrong anyway. And you should really focus more on good two-dimensional shapes before you start adding three-dimensional shapes. Because two-dimensional shapes are all about simplification. It's all about how to simplify the structure that you're looking at. And it's actually very difficult to simplify. It's not easy. So if you can get a very good simplification of something, even before you started adding all of the details, then I find that the rest of your drawing actually starts turning out pretty well. So someone keeps texting me again. Okay. All right. We'll leave that there. Right. I'll get back to that guy in a second. Let's carry on with our lesson. Well, this is not so much a lesson. This is just a draw with me. This is just, you know, this video series is all about just sketching around, playing around, maybe making a few mistakes along the way. That's all it's about. They're not really intended to be video tutorials as such, although you could probably use them as well. Like, it's like I always say, like I always learned, you know, when I was taking instruction from my drawing teacher, I learned a lot from him just by watching. And you know, I was mostly a self-taught artist, so I learned a lot by just reading books and looking at diagrams and trying to understand them that way. And you know, looking at drawings is very helpful, and you know, making an attempt to understand the diagrams is really really helpful. But it's also very difficult to do that. And I don't really think I learned how to draw properly until I actually did seek out a bit of tuition. And because you know when you're teaching yourself how to draw, you're a little bit lost in the dark, I think. And you can definitely learn that way, but it does take you a long time, like probably a lot longer than it should. Um, that was kind of how I felt anyway in my own experience. I just felt like everything was taking me forever to learn, and you know when I did seek out tuition, and I was paying attention to how my teacher was drawing and the marks he would make on the page, and it just helped me out a lot, I think, because you learn a lot by watching somebody draw, even if they're not fully explaining what they're doing. Um, I think on a subconscious level, you're still kind of soaking in a lot of that information, and that was kind of my reasoning to make this video series on YouTube, so you could just watch me draw in real time, and maybe you'll pick up on things. It's not like a full-on tutorial as such. I don't always have the energy for those. just, I just like to, flick the camera on, press record, jump into it, and start sketching away. Okay, so now I'm thinking about the structure of this palm of the hand, that three-dimensional structure. Not drawn perfectly, but it will do. Okay, alright. That's what I've got there. Not bad. Not bad. Let's start by sketching in those knuckles like we did last time. So I'll put one here. I gotta do 4 equal divisions. And this is really my chance to start pushing the perspective of this drawing a little bit. So this knuckle I can probably have kind of tucked away behind this one. So this circle is going to overlap this circle a little bit. This might overlap a little bit too. The little finger, because it's a bit on the smaller side, might just stop about there. Your marks on the page do get quite messy when you're scribbling around like that, so make sure you got an eraser handy so you can just keep your drawing a little bit on the cleaner side, because you don't want a messy drawing. I mean, you got to scribble a little bit when you're drawing from your head. You got to scribble around and kind of find the form that you're looking for, in a sense. But you don't want to scribble around too much. Whenever you place a line on the page, you definitely want to place it more or less in the correct position. So you don't want to spend too much time scribbling around for everything. You want to make sure that you've got a general idea of what it is you're drawing, and a lot of that, I think, just comes down to proportions and perspective. But I'm looking for like those overlapping shapes of the knuckles. Just trying to determine which knuckles are going to be in front, which ones are going to be behind. And then here's like the tip of the little finger down here. So I'm kind of drawing this hand as if it's like holding an object, like a pole or something. You know, which I can kind of sketch in here. Probably should have sketched that in earlier. All right. Let me see what I can do with this finger here, because I wanted it to be raised. But I don't like the pose of that index finger, so I'm actually gonna fortunately rub it out, and maybe I'll kind of just draw it in a slightly lower position, maybe. Just kind of. So that's the thing, like, you know, if you're drawing a hand from your head, it definitely helps to have an idea of the pose of the hand. Kind of like when you're drawing faces, you know, you gotta, you know, if you're drawing a character from imagination, you've got to think about the general appearance of that character, you know. What kind of hairstyle do they have? Maybe ethnicity, you know, that could help as well when designing a character. What kind of facial expression, you know, and what's the character doing? And I think it's kind of the same with hands, because hands have a lot of character, and it's very difficult to sort of capture that character a lot. Anyway, I'll just decide on this now. I'm going to just leave it there because I don't want to spend forever in this stage. I want to kind of get a move on. Let's just, again, take my eraser, just clean it up. It got very rough there for a second. So I've just rolled over it with the eraser. That's always a good technique. And now I'm just going to draw the metacarpals. How they sort of, you know, there's that concavity where it curves inwards. And I'm just having a look at my underdrawing. Alright. And this metacarpal back here is actually tucked behind this one, it seems. Maybe there's a little bit of it poking out the back here, and then you can see it re-emerge over here. So that's kind of giving us a bit of an idea of what the knuckles might be looking like in this position. Let's go ahead and also draw the concavity for the phalanges. Alright. Just sketching them in very loosely. Just attaching these landmarks. The phalanges should be a little bit thicker towards this part, and then they should taper inwards towards the fingertip. So each joint really should be starting to appear as if it's getting narrower and narrower. That's a very good way to conceptualize the hand. But I like drawing hands like this with just circles for the knuckles and then just drawing in these sort of concavities because I feel like it just gives me a much better idea of the I guess the perspective of the form. It's very easy. It's a lot easier for me to get that three-dimensional nature, just like I've done here. Just drawing these loose silhouettes and these larger knuckles, you know, like helps me to determine what the perspective of the form is a lot more easily. You can draw the phalanges with rectangular prisms as well. You don't have to use this. You can draw like boxes, and that way, you know, that's a good method too because you can actually um, determine the top and the side planes of the fingers. But I think for the bones, I'm going to stick with what I'm doing right now. Alright, so now I've got to sort of draw in each knuckle. Just to determine the perspective of each knuckle. So I'm drawing this cross contour. Alright, there we go. So these cross contours for the knuckles are really going to help me out here. I would say this is probably the most important step for me personally when I'm drawing these complex forms. So this is like a line that wraps around the centers of each joint for the knuckles. And it just helps get me a much better idea of the forms. And then, what I then like to do is I like to draw like the center profile line that sort of runs down the center of each phalange and metacarpal as well. And this profile line gives me a lot of information. But again, I'm just kind of sketching it in. But this profile line will tell me the rotation of each finger. It's also going to give me an idea of how to sculpt these 3D forms a little bit better. It takes a little bit of practice drawing these, and you don't want to be afraid to sort of shake things up and draw more interesting shapes too. I like to draw this sort of crease in between the middle of each joint, just to kind of get that more 3D effect, I suppose. But again, I'm kind of just sketching everything in with a broken line. Like I'm not committing. Okay, so we've got a bit of an impression of something here. So what I should do now is I kind of got to refine this silhouette. I should probably also refine a lot of these shapes running down between each joint. So I'm going to kind of refine the planes of the joints first, because I feel like that's probably a good place to start. They hold a lot of information in terms of the 3D nature of these forms. So I'm going to try and refine them a little bit. Well, that's a hard one. That's a really hard form to draw right there. I'm looking at that sort of crease between this joint and this joint, but kind of getting it, slowly sketching that in. Okay. It's getting there. Oh, fuck. This is so hard. This is hard. Right. Yeah, there's that phalange on the end. That fingertip, which it's got like a bit of a. I always remember it as like a bit of a hook on the end of the fingertip there, and it kind of gets a bit wider towards the tip as well. But it sort of like hooks in at the bottom, and then it expands outwards towards the joint, and that's kind of how I remember that. And you don't have to draw that in massive detail in order to kind of get the idea of it. I'm going to just try and refine my sketch a little bit, though, if I can. Just don't know if I've really drawn that the way I wanted it to. That's alright. That's fine. I'll just leave it like that. So what I'm doing here, these little dash lines, like I'm trying to separate the center of the phalanges from these joints as well. So I'm also thinking about those. So the joint here, for example, on the ring finger would sort of taper in. And when I draw those separated planes, sometimes I draw like an angle like that, depending on what kind of perspective we're viewing it from. And then it sort of comes back out like that. It's a very tricky form to actually explain, but you can kind of see how I'm separating the forms that way, I suppose. So they are very tricky forms to explain because it's so abstract. I haven't really got a sort of real explanation for what I'm doing at this point, which sounds awful, but I just. But you can kind of see how I've done this close-up view of the phalanges here, and there's like these almost like pentagonal shapes on the knuckles there, and that's kind of that's how I think of it. That's how I conceptualize it. But as always, it's a very abstract way of thinking. Bones don't typically look like that. But you've got to draw them somehow, so that's how I do it. Okay. Just kind of sketching in some more of the forms here. Right. About there. Yeah, it's a very stylish way of drawing hands, I must admit. It's not exactly, I guess, true to life, but I'm kind of realizing that it doesn't really have to be. Like when I looked at the drawings of Gottfried Bames and like Proco and other artists, I realized that there's always going to be some kind of stylization in drawing, especially if you're going to draw the planes of something. Planes are just they're just an interpretation of the forms, and that's how I think of it. When you're drawing the planes of an object, you're just, in a sense, just kind of sketching a form that makes sense to you. And you're just drawing it in a way that you can understand. And hopefully the people looking at your drawing will also be able to understand it. Yeah, I don't think that's bad. Maybe I'll draw like maybe the thumb poking out over here behind this object, just to sort of indicate. Okay. We're just going to lighten this up because it got very dark, very messy. And I'm just going to kind of figure out the planes again. So I think the whole back of the hand should probably be in shadow. Like if the light source is coming from above or somewhere close to above, I feel like this whole back of the hand should probably be in shadow because it's kind of facing downwards a little bit. Or it's kind of like the back planes are facing away from the light source. So would make sense then to me if this was just all in darkness. And maybe like these front faces here would be in light. Whoops. Just made a mark that I didn't want right there. Let's clean that up. Okay, let's just... So right now, all I'm doing... So I'm just indicating the lines that are likely to be cloaked in shadow. And I'm adjusting the shapes of my planes accordingly. So I just need to be pretty careful, I guess, what I do here. Okay. Well, I think that'll probably do, so I guess we'll just start rendering everything in. I'm just going to hatch pretty much just through the drawing to begin with. Just so I can establish a bit of atmosphere. Okay. And then I think what I'll do is I'll kind of hatch through the background, but this time sort of go around the silhouette of the hand. So, you know, like in here, for example, where the radial bone separates from the ulnar. And now I can come into those shadow shapes. In just a little bit more detail. Just gently hatching. I'm using a 6B pencil. So I don't want to hatch too dark, obviously, because otherwise I'm going to make a mess of it all. There's just very light hatching strokes. Maybe hatch through the atmosphere again, like in between the fingers. Let's. Some of those half tones in there. Also, with the phalanges, I like to make them like a little bit skinnier, so I push this shadow shape a little bit more towards the center. That just kind of gives the effect of just that real tapering effect, I think. I'm going to scribble this part in as like an indication of the thumb. So like emerging from the background. I think that's a really nice effect. So now I just need to start kind of adding some of those core shadows into the drawing. So it's not really something I've done in this drawing yet, where I've got to separate the border between light and shadow. And I think, that's obviously a very important thing to do in any drawing that you do. And I'm not really focused on that yet. So I think it's time to. Just kind of using these new shadow shapes to refine the planes of what I'm drawing. So I'm kind of using this opportunity now to basically redraw the planes, but using tone as a way to do it. And I can also focus on those cast shadows too. I can also focus on occlusion shadow. It's also another good technique to use. Just looking for opportunities to render this in a way that can make the drawing a little more readable, but still fairly stylish as well. Like I said, photorealism is not something we're going for. I really want to capture that sense of atmosphere and depth. All of that good stuff. And I'm basically switching between pencils. So here's how I'm thinking of it. Like, I like the fuzzy atmosphere. So if I want that softness, I'll use the 6B pencil for that, because you get very soft tones using a 6B pencil. But if I need to separate the planes to make them a bit more readable, anything like that, then I'll actually go ahead and use my 2H pencil here to start kind of outlining certain things. Or I can use the 2H pencil to simply draw tones in very lightly if I'm unsure about anything. That's another way I could use that. You can also use your 2H pencil to just kind of refine any of the shapes you need. Those shadow shapes. If you need them to I don't know if you need them to just sharpen anything up. Brain's not working today, so it's kind of struggling a little bit. So I'm just going to crack on with this drawing, I reckon. Just refine it to a point where I want it. But I think I've got what I want here. But yeah, this kind of very atmospheric tonal rendering is really cool. You can get some really cool effects with it. And it's a great technique because, you know, drawing the planes and trying to predict where the shadows are going to fall is, as you know, is pretty difficult. But if you can kind of simplify the lighting a little bit and use atmosphere to your advantage, you can kind of get away with any mistakes that you make with the lighting scenario. So, you know, if you shade the planes in wrong, or, well, not wrong, but maybe if you're a little bit unsure of something, you can probably just blend it in with the background a little bit. and you could probably get away with that. I think a lot of people are a bit scared of drawing from imagination because it's tough, and I was like that for many years. And I thought that I had to know everything about everything before I could even start drawing from imagination, but it's actually not the case. A lot of it is really just drawing with style, I guess. And then you kind of well, I mean, a lot of it is drawing from knowledge. I mean, you got to know the planes of what you're drawing, and you got to know the general structure of what you're drawing. And then once you've got that, then yeah, I think a lot of it is just sort of not making it up, but just using techniques to simplify the drawing and sort of like you can see like the joint between these knuckles here. You can see I'm kind of blending that into the background, for example, and I'm just keeping that part of the drawing very vague and ambiguous, and I'm doing that because I think it looks better. That's the main reason I'm doing it. But I'm also doing it because I don't really want to draw the detail in that area. I don't really want to figure out exactly how those two actually join and communicate together. So if I can sort of just simplify that whole area with a few bits and pieces of tone, and I can also use this to my advantage to bring this knuckle forward. You see how this knuckle's sort of hitting the light? So I can actually use this technique to darken the area around the knuckle, the joint included here, bleeding it into the background, and that just brings that forward a lot more. And that's when you really start getting that three-dimensionality. And, drawing, whether you're drawing from life or imagination, they both really kind of rely on the same fundamentals, especially when it comes to rendering. You're using light in a way to improve the subject, and you're, trying to emphasize certain things using light as your weapon of choice. I feel like this has kind of gotten to a point where, I mean, I could keep going with it, but I feel like for a sketch, I've pretty much conveyed what I wanted to, so that's how I know to kind of stop drawing now. My intuition is kind of telling me to stop. My hand disagrees. It keeps going. It's gonna... Yeah, so basically, I guess at this point of the drawing, I'm gonna just assess everything first. Before I stop, I'm just gonna assess it. I'm gonna look at the structure of things. And I'm just gonna kind of make a decision. Is the structure clear? Have I represented what I wanted to represent? That's the first thing you got to ask yourself in a sketch, because that's kind of what the sketch is. You got to, it doesn't have to be a finished drawing, but it's got to look like the thing you're trying to draw, right? So that's the first thing you want to ask yourself. Does it look like the thing I was trying to draw? All right, so I think yes, it kind of does look like a hand of a skeleton, hopefully. Hopefully I've not strayed too far off the beaten path, but in my opinion, that looks pretty much like what I wanted. Okay, so that's that part answered. The second thing I need to ask myself, is there anything that's unclear in the drawing? And that's another thing you want to ask. So if you ever get to a point in the drawing where you're just kind of chipping away at it, but not really making much progress, these are the questions you want to ask yourself. You just got to stop yourself and just go, okay, hold up. You know, let's back up, let's assess. So, you know, does it look like what you're trying to draw? Yes. Okay, cool. And is there anything in the drawing that is unclear? Okay. Now, unclear does not mean ambiguous. I talked a little bit about ambiguity, like using the atmosphere to blend some of the forms into the background and lose some of that detail. That's fine. That's actually good for the drawing. But when I talk about what's unclear, I'm talking about maybe things in the drawing that don't quite make much sense when you look at it. Or, you know, if you look at a certain part, you know, is it confusing to look at? Is it you know, is it not making much sense when you look at it? And you have to kind of just analyze every single part of the drawing when you're thinking like this. And you got to look for those parts with a very keen eye. And I think that's just something that comes with experience, I think. You know, like the core shadows, I probably could have focused on a bit more. Maybe a bit more of the aerial perspective. But these are also things that I think might need to be done on a bigger drawing if it's not possible to sketch it here. And perhaps a bigger drawing might be a good opportunity. I'm going to try and just erase into some of these things. So, like, I don't want to lose the detail of the planes, but I also have to simplify it a little bit. And that's another question you have to ask yourself when you're looking at your sketch. You know, it's like, is there anything that looks a bit too complicated? Is there anything that just looks overwhelming to look at? Is there anything that needs to be simplified, or can it be done in a simpler way? Those are also very good questions to ask yourself when you're assessing your drawing. So that's what I like to do these days. It's something I never used to do. Like, I never used to ask myself questions like this when I sketched around. But it is something I'm doing a lot more now because, and this is what I, in another video, I was talking about drawing consciously and making sure that you're always drawing consciously and you're assessing what you're doing. Well, that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like you're actually thinking about what's on your page. And you are asking yourself these very important questions, because if you just simply ask yourself the question, you'll probably find exactly what you need to do. You might find the answer. So, you know, I'm thinking, well, you know, I probably could have focused a bit more on the atmospheric perspective of this drawing, because that's something I didn't really draw in with this one too much. That's definitely something I could have done. Just going to simplify that. I think that's it, guys. I think this drawing is pretty much finished. I'm going to maybe put a few hatching strokes around it. Give it a little bit of background. Yeah, I think maybe a bit more atmospheric perspective would have been good, organizing the half tones and the shadows and controlling that contrast a little bit more. That being said, though, I think this has been a successful sketch. Much better than this one earlier today, so I'm not unhappy with it. It's good. And I'm liking that I'm playing around with the atmosphere a bit more and I'm actually cutting through the shape with the atmosphere. That's something that I haven't really done much of until now. So I really want to play with that in the future because I just think it's a really awesome appearance. And, I could probably make that even darker. Oops, voice break. Make it a little bit darker. Really just kind of push the tonality of the drawing a little more, I think. Just going to render a little bit of background because I think this sketch deserves it. Okay. Well, that's it for that. That's enough. I'm happy with that. I think the structure's looking pretty good. I like the idea. I like the atmosphere. Photorealistic, it is not. But I think it does look pretty cool. And at the end of the day, I can't ask for much more than that, can I? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed drawing with me today. Not sure what the next episode is going to be, because we've done a couple of hands now. I think I'll just keep doing the hand studies in private from now on. Like, I feel like the bones I've got the hang of, but I've also got to do other things like muscles and tendons and things, and probably won't record myself doing that. I think I'll just try and build up my level of skill before I try doing that. But otherwise, that was a fun little session, and hopefully I'm on my way to mastering hands, so fingers crossed.